day here in northern Israel, where, despite the lovely sound of the birds chirping and the flowers blooming, there's war happening all around. And yeah, you hear it and you feel it. Sometimes we literally hear it and feel it shaking the walls and shit when the bombs are loud enough. These days, though, the people living on the border with Gaza are feeling those shaking walls a lot more. We're hearing those booms a lot more because the IDF is back in Gaza, like operating, on a war footing. There's no ceasefire in place. Technically, the ceasefire ended. You got to remember, the ceasefire really ended a couple weeks ago, and then that ceasefire basically, was maintained in a state of we'll see during a couple of weeks while the U.S. envoy of President Trump, Mr. Witkoff, the former real estate lawyer or developer or something, turned, I think he's a real estate lawyer, right? Anyway, turned somehow special envoy to the Middle East and top negotiator for the Trump team for some reason. It's okay. So zero skills in diplomatic negotiations, but hey, building negotiations are, well, it's quite complicated to put up a building. No, not really. I mean, yeah, I get it, zoning laws and all that, but it's not the same as interstate politics. And that, if anything, if the person is successful when they come from zero experience in a field directly, then it kind of calls into question the validity of that field and all of the people who professed it for so long and yet did not achieve results with the same problem. And if that person is able to do that for multiple problems, well, then it really calls into question the entire field, or significant portions, if not the entirety of that field of learning, right, and practice. Because if you're able to bring about resolution to issues that have been around for 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 years without any actual relevant experience in the field, look at that, this combination, then it really, and you're able to do it time and time again in different fields, well, that's quite remarkable. Of course, the jury is still out because these things have yet to happen. So let's not be premature. Let's not be hasty. As the treants would say in The Lord of the Ring, let's not be hasty. Right? But, we'll see. Time will tell whether or not all of that inexperience leads to anything astounding. Personally, I'm not losing sleep over it. I ain't waiting up nights for that. But what I can tell you is there is a war happening. All right, again, and the Israelis are at it again, and the world is doing their usual shtick. They're pretending to care. Oh, the Israelis are doing the genocide thing, all the usual BS they say, without any evidence to back it up, right? And as soon as like one bomb lands in in Gaza, immediately all the Palestinian media, like the BBC, the CNNs, everyone, right? The New York Times, I call them the Palestinian media because they effectively are, not just Al Jazeera, which is obviously pro-Palestine media, but even mainstream American and European media is Palestinian media, effectively. They've been hating on Israel for, basically since 1967. Ever since Israel won the Six-Day War, they found every excuse in the book to just side with the terrorists. And it's been getting increasingly so since the first Intifada started in 1987. Like literally, that was the watershed moment at which all the masks came off, so to speak, while the Palestinians were running around throwing stones and Molotov cocktails and using knives and guns to launch their quote-unquote intifada in 1987. That's when the reporters covering the situation were just all like, yeah, okay, we're extreme leftists and we don't mind showing our face. And I say this as a person who literally worked in the media at the time and even after. I was a teenager, frankly, during the first Intifada, but interested in photojournalism and all that, and doing stuff related to it. And already a couple years later, was working in that field as a photojournalist for like UPI or AFP and Washington Times, like, as a stringer or a photographer or whatever, like just taking pictures here or there for different shoots, or really mostly helping, starting out as a helper, right, an assistant on some jobs, and also as a photojournalist on other jobs. A lot of hurry up and wait, go to news events and wait. And why do I mention that? Because a lot of what you see in the news anyway is artificial, right? It's completely staged. Like, you may not think so, but it is in fact staged, right? Like literally entire events that you think, and then you see them and you're like, there's no way that's staged. That's got to be, they're just covering the news. No, they stage protests, right? They stage violent uprisings. They stage people, kids throwing rocks against tanks, kids throwing rocks against police jeeps, kids throwing rocks at soldiers. They stage shootings. You don't think they stage shootings? Well, guess what? They do. How do we know this? Well, during October 7th, we know for a fact that multiple reporters, people getting paid by Western media outlets, okay, which are pro-Palestinian outlets, 100%, like very, 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 very few of them are actually pro-Israel, let alone balanced and actually neutral. Like, objective media reporting is a dead thing of the past. It used to exist. It used to be a noble cause. It used to be a great reason to be a reporter or an editor. But there is no neutral, objective news since pretty much forever, but it's really out the window since the last more than 40 years, like 40 years is easily, right? And even in the US, technically speaking, the news on the broadcast networks and on the public radio networks, like broadcast television and broadcast radio, the news is supposed to be objective. It's not supposed to be agenda-driven. Cable news can be. Cable news, any private distribution mechanism where you pay to distribute can be. But if you're granted a license by the United States government, your news section is supposed to be objective. Well, even on the broadcast networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, even Fox, if they have like a local news or whatever, they're supposed to be objective news. And you'll notice, whether you like to admit it or not, okay, that those are ironically still kind of the closest thing you could argue to objective news in America, even though they're clearly not objective, right? They're clearly not objective, okay? They clearly show their bias, but they are the thing they attempt to put on a face of objectivity because they have to by law. Of course, they don't achieve that. Of course, they don't maintain that. Of course, they are biased as hell, but they're nowhere near as biased as like the cable news networks, where there's no mask on ever. Like, they're fully agenda driven on all sides, which in America mostly means two sides, but basically the left and the right are extremely agenda driven. And you see the bias shine right through, and it's grotesque, in my opinion, because that's not what news is. But, the old saying, if you don't stay up to date with the news, you're uninformed. If you do stay up to date with the news, you're misinformed. So the trick is to be collecting news from a bunch of different sources and then sort out the wheat from the chaff, sort out the signal from the noise, right? Which is not difficult to do if you spend a lot of time doing it. But to be honest, most people don't have the time to do that. So if they're lucky, they get to pick one or two, sources. If they're really lucky, two or more. But usually they just pick one. Or they just randomly I mean, pick one. It's just whatever happens to be on or in front of them is what they consume, right? Without much thought into that. They may not think about the agenda very much. They may be aware generally of the slant of the organization that put out that information, maybe, but like most people aren't aware of that. The vast overwhelming majority of people are not aware of that. So it's a little bit of a ridiculous situation when the information people consume really just misinforms them for the most part, because they don't bother to sort out the wheat from the chaff, because they can't. They don't have the time. And that's kind of what the publishers are hoping for, that you only have time for one source at best, and that you're going to choose theirs, and therefore you'll believe whatever nonsense they tell you. Anyway. So back to the main at hand before I get derailed on that topic. But what we were just talking about now. So Israel is clearly back in a state of fighting. And that means that basically there's going to be more bloodshed. And we are already seeing the usual. Hold on 1 second. I'll put you in the dark here. We're already seeing the usual noisemakers crying foul and saying that Israel is the devil and is killing all the innocent people and all the usual garbage that we see without any evidence. Like they tell you, there's hundreds of bodies were counted, blah blah blah. The actual fact is, not hundreds of bodies were counted. At least not in any verifiable way. But even if they were, you got to remember, how did we get to this situation? We got to this situation because the Palestinians, and specifically Hamas, and all of their followers, did something very stupid. And you know what that stupid thing is. They followed. Right? They effed around, and now they're finding out. And why did they do that? Well, they did that because historically, that's all they've ever done. Like literally, in fact, not even like literally, that is all they have ever done. Right? I don't say it to be mean. It's just a fact. As a people, what have they done? They FAFO'd their entire existence. Now, what do I mean by their entire existence? Well, they're an artificial synthetic convention. Not to bring you down into the history of this thing, but you should be at least aware of the basics of it. The identity of people who call themselves Palestinians was not a thing pre-1964 at all. And it was not a thing even pre-1967 popularly. And it was not even popular among Palestinians, meaning the majority of Palestinians refused to call themselves Palestinians until the 1970s. Until that time, Palestinians had consistently rejected the label Palestinian. They'd always called themselves Arabs. And to this day, there are many Arabs who refuse to call themselves Palestinians. And among the Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria, not just the ones who live in Israel, there are still Palestinians to this day who do not call themselves Palestinians. They call themselves Arabs. Even if, technically speaking, some of them are not even really Arabs. They were Arabized. They were Islamized by the conquering Arab armies, or their ancestors were, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,300 years ago. They were Arabized when the Muslim armies conquered them and turned their ancestors into Muslims and gave them Arab culture from the Arab Peninsula from whence those conquering armies came. So many of these people who nowadays hate Israel and hate the Jews, honestly, were they themselves once Jews 1,000 years ago. Like, it had the Arab armies not conquered them, they would have been born into Jewish families or Christian families or other types of families that existed at the time that were conquered by the Arabs. So their DNA is not Arab when you go back beyond 1,000 years. They have Assyrian DNA, they have Coptic DNA, like they have all kinds of interesting mixes, right? Even in Persia, they're not Arab, clearly not Arab. They're Muslim, but they're not Arab, right? And they conquered the Persian culture, the Shiites, right? During our lifetime, like when I was a child, Persia, Iran, was still Persian. The vast overwhelming majority of people in Persia were still Persian and not Muslim. In my lifetime, Persia has become an extremist Muslim state. Because again, it's a conquering religion. That is their ethos. They believe in conquering. They don't believe in living in peace side by side with their neighbors. They believe in fucking around and finding out. That's their whole shtick. You need to understand that if you want to understand the Middle East. It's an essential part of comprehension of this area of the world. Just like my dog is an essential part of comprehension of this space and time. You want to say hi, buddy? No? So, yeah, Israel's at war on multiple fronts with Gaza, with Lebanon. We are apparently our Air Force is flying sorties over Syria, taking out any remaining targets from the old Syrian armed forces so that the HTS does not acquire them, or so that no other groups in Syria that might be hostile to Israel don't, so that they don't acquire them also. At the same time, Israel is reportedly trying to see if there's a path to negotiate the resettlement of some of the people from Gaza into Syria. So I don't think it's going to be a very successful situation, because trying to resettle people from Gaza to Syria while at the same time we're bombing Syria, not exactly a path to success, not exactly the path of least resistance. And especially not while, right, Israel is making every effort to keep those of Syria safe from the HTS. So far, there are in fact already reports of HTS doing horrific things to people in South Syria, included to the Druze, right? There's been already some fighting in and around Damascus with the Druze and the HTS. And apparently the HTS are trying to ramp it up and attack the Druze even more. And they want to target the Druze down in the area of the south where they're near the Israeli border. All right, they want to take over those towns from the Druze and put their oppressive Islamic State boot on them, because that's what they do. Because you can't forget, these people are Al-Qaeda, right? It's not like they're like Al Qaeda. No. HTS is Al Qaeda. They literally were formed by a guy who ran Al Qaeda in Iraq and Al Qaeda in Syria. He was in Al Qaeda in Iraq. He was in the Islamic State. Directly as a member. And then he went to, after leaving Iraq, he went back to Syria. Iraq was over. He went to Syria to form a group there and employed the same disgusting tactics and was a terrorist with a multi-million-dollar reward on his head by the United States authorities. And then, after some years, when he figured out, oh, these U.S. forces are quite serious and they're going to get me, inevitably, so I better start acting the part of a reformer. So he pretends that he's not a terrorist anymore, but he's still a terrorist. There is no doubt about that. He is still a terrorist. Okay, hold on one second. It's a bit... Like HTS is, in case you're wondering, thing. Are a bunch of sick dudes who believe in taking over the world, imposing Sharia law or Sunni law, whatever. Well, Sharia law, in any case. And they are Sunnis. Aye! Dog, hilarious. I got a big boy here. You just big paws, big heavy steps on something. All right, buddy, come on out. Let's go. Yeah, you want to go outside, huh? I know. It's fun outside in the mud. I agree. The big boy likes playing outside in the mud. He let me know that with one of his very big paws. Boom. So Islamic State, I know it sounds like I'm wandering a little bit. Don't worry, I'm weaving. You guys like the weave? I'll give you a weave. So HTS, technically not fighting Israel right now. They've given signals here and there that they don't want to fight Israel, which tactically you can understand why that is, because they're aware that they don't have a chance to fight against Israel, obviously, especially now that Israel has literally decimated the entire Syrian military, or what was left of it, in terms of their arsenal, their airplanes, their boats, all that stuff is gone, right? They don't have any major weapons left, or nothing, not a tremendous amount of them. All their most devastating stuff Israel has already taken out, and anything that it hasn't yet taken out, well, apparently they're working on it because they keep taking out stuff every day. But apparently, like, Israel's military intelligence claimed, who knows how accurate it is, but they claimed within like 24 or 48 hours after Assad was outed from office, the Israeli military said that they had in their initial, right? So Israel had taken out obviously they didn't take out 80% they didn't go and kill 80% of Syria's army soldiers because the Syrian army abandoned their post. There was no one to shoot at. That's why they destroyed the assets, because they were just standing there and potentially going to be taken over by rapidly moving HTS forces. So instead of just letting those forces grab those arms, the Israelis said, well, we have an opportunity, we have a very short window here, maybe hours, maybe a day or two, to destroy as much as possible and make sure that these guys don't get this stuff. So that's exactly what Israel did. And in subsequent attacks, they've basically been targeting very specific assets that they did not manage to hit during that initial period of time. But it doesn't mean that they can't continue to target assets that they didn't manage to hit during those 2 days. And in fact, that's exactly what they're doing. Right? But they're just being much more select, if you will, about how they choose those targets and when they hit them, et cetera, and where they hit them and what they hit them with. Now you can say, well, hang on, doesn't that mean that if those sites are already in the hands of HTS, Israel is already fighting HTS? You can make that argument if you want, and technically I'm sure Israel has already knocked off a number of HTS personnel who were assigned to guard some stuff that the Syrian military had left over. Well, you FAFO, you overthrow an army, you overtake a country, there's going to be a period of unrest, and this is that period when even foreign forces will exploit the inefficiencies of the situation, which is exactly what's happening when Israel hits those assets that have yet to be knocked out. As well, they should be knocked out, frankly, because why should Israel allow a bunch of terrorists, which is what HTS is, why should we allow a bunch of terrorists to simply have a massive arsenal? And the answer is we shouldn't. So it's a good thing that they're doing that. Anyway, in addition to that, Israel is fighting the Hezbollah in Lebanon, where, again, there is no ceasefire. Technically, the ceasefire ended. In theory, it was extended, but in reality, not really. There are definitely attacks happening on Lebanese assets that are Hezbollah assets. You may not hear about them that much in the news. That's because the biased media doesn't want to report on it yet. But when it's expedient for them, they will. And Israel is fighting against the Houthis, who are continually shooting things at Israel and at Americans and British forces in the Red Sea, which is insane, because every time they do that, they get hellfire delivered to them. And now it's been days on end. The Sana'a has fallen under attack from the U.S., who has been basically shooting back at Yemen for shooting at its Navy ships and so on. But that's what you get when you're fighting with Yemen. You got a bunch of Houthis who are too incompetent to know when to stop shooting at you. They FAFO hardcore. And we'll see. Maybe they will continue fighting and continue getting destroyed. So that's going to do it for now. That's just a quick update for you about what's happening. That wasn't so quick, I guess. But you have to, it's a complex situation. And honestly, it's one that can be talked about for a very, very, very long time. But to wrap it all up, maybe by some miracle, Mr. Witkoff will be an amazing negotiator and somehow bring about an effective change in the situation. Like I said, I ain't waiting up nights for it. I'm not losing sleep on that one. I wish him luck. It's just, we've heard these kind of promises before, just in different tones and using different language, but pretty much the same thing. So I'm not keeping my hopes in the bag on that. And the reality is Israel is going to have to keep fighting against the bad guys by itself. Yes, we have partners and allies, but boots on the ground, it's us. And it's our fight anyway. We're the ones that are being attacked. We are the front line of this war. And remember, Israel has to win or Israel ceases to exist. And Israel and the Palestinians don't have to win. They can lose and there will be peace. they refuse to lose. Well, they've lost, but they refuse to admit that they've lost, and that's why the war keeps going on. They refuse to raise the white flag, essentially. They just keep fighting even though they have nothing essentially to fight with. I mean, yeah, okay, they can shoot guns and they can shoot rockets and they can do all that stuff, but the level of sophistication between their guns and rockets and Israel's guns and rockets, it's leagues apart, right? Even if they got the weapons directly from China or Russia or North Korea, which in some cases they did, their rocket technology is clearly nowhere near Israel's level, right? Their ability to fight as a fighting force is very disorganized at best. And after what happened on October 7th, when we saw that they tried to put some organization to that whole thing, since then, Israel has been destroying Hamas. And even though you could say, well, they replenished all the the terrorists of Hamas, they call them soldiers. So they haven't lost any soldiers because now they have all their soldiers back. Again, they're not soldiers, they're terrorists. They don't observe the Geneva Conventions, they're terrorists. And the Geneva Convention is another thing. As somebody put it on the server that I'm on, the Geneva Suggestion, or as I call it, the Geneva Infection. Because all it does is handcuff the good guys and let the bad guys run free. The bad guys don't observe the Geneva Convention, so what good is it? When I say the bad guys, I mean terrorists who are not a party to the Geneva Convention. They don't observe it. They don't give a damn what it says. They don't give people human rights. They don't not commit war crimes. All it does is tie the hands of the people who have to fight such bastards. That's literally all it does at this point. You know, yes, after World War II, Geneva Convention was good to establish as a foundation to make sure that no other country would do what the Nazis did. Well, guess what? The bad guys found a loophole. What's the loophole? Don't be a party to the Geneva Convention. Be a non-state actor. Fight a national liberation movement. Oh, the UN loves national liberation movements. Oh, sure. Oh, we'll take money from evil dictators who are part of the UN and have an equal vote, just like democracies do in the UN. Oh, no problem. We'll take money from them and their little pet project, that national liberation movement, as long as it targets Jews, no problem. Like, the hypocrisy is extreme and deep and at multiple levels. And that's why, even though the UN was an organization that actually voted for the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the UN since then has pretty much not done good things for the most part. Sure, the occasional disaster, they send relief, they do this, they do that. Natural disasters. But how many wars have they actually stopped properly? You could say, well, they've resettled a lot of refugees around the world. Yeah. What about the Palestinian refugees? Why haven't they resettled them? Why are they the only people group on planet Earth with a dedicated relief works agency specifically for their own refugees, and yet their refugee number is the only refugee number in the world that keeps growing? Do you know why that is? Because they're allowed to pass on their refugee status intergenerationally from one generation to the next. Even the ones who never left Israel, or Judea and Samaria or Gaza, they're allowed to pass on their refugee status. I'm sorry, but if you lived for 70 years in Gaza for the last 70 years, and before that you were for 20 years living in some other part of Israel or British Mandate Palestine at the time, that means that 70 out of 90 years you've been living in Gaza, you're not a refugee, you're from Gaza, right? That's what you call home. And you know, I'm a refugee. Okay, so go live in another place, refugee. No, I will never leave here. It's my home. How can it be your home if you're a refugee? Oh, yes, the hypocrisy is deep. So they say they're not from there, but the moment you tell them, okay, go somewhere else, oh, no, we're never leaving. This is where we're from. Yeah, they're called hypocrites. Unfortunately, Islam believes that once Muslims live in a certain place, that place is forever part of the House of Islam, and even if they ever leave that place, it's still Islamic, and they have every right and obligation to come back and take it back at a later date, right? The House of Islam. And then there's the House of War, which is any place that they have not yet taken over, because they believe in conquering the world, right? They believe in conquering everything, which is why they call themselves the religion of peace, which is complete and utter nonsense. But their view of the religion of peace is, well, if everyone's Muslim under the unifying flag of Muhammad and Islam, there'll be no need to fight. Yeah, because we see how well Muslims don't fight amongst each other. Like, forget Sunni and Shia, which don't even consider each other Muslims. Yeah, they do when they're fighting Jews or whoever, but Muslims do not consider Shia to be real Muslims. I mean, Sunni do not consider Shia to be real Muslims. Shia do not consider Sunni to be real Muslims. Like at their core, yeah, they consider them to be apostates or blasphemers or whatever. And they get along so marvelously well. Oh, when was the last time you ever heard about Muslims fighting Muslims? Answer is, it happens all the time, every day, and nobody covers it like they do the fighting between the Jews and the Arabs, the Jews and the Muslims. Why is that? No Jews, no news, right? Jews are news. That's the reason. You may not like it. That's the reason. Jews are news. If your story's got no Jews, your story won't make news. If it's a war, not nearly as much as it'll make if there's Jews involved. How do I know? Well, how many stories were written about Bashar Assad's murder of 600,000 people during the last 12 years, 13 years? How many stories? Do you know? How many times did you actually read about what was happening across Syria during the civil war? How many times did you hear about Israel fighting Arabs in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria, or as they call it, the West Bank? Right? There is no West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. The reason they call it Judea and Samaria is in order to obliterate the historical ties of the Jewish people to their ancestral homeland. Jews are from Judea. Jews are from Judea. Say it with me. Jews are from Judea. Yeah, is that hard to understand? Yeah. Apparently, for most people in the West, it is hard to understand, which is shocking. Anastasia Steer, Jews are news, blah, blah, blah. That's so funny. You think you'll get likes? You wouldn't. No, I don't think I'll get likes. I don't do this for the likes, obviously. I'm not putting a high production value into my videos. I'm doing a walk and talk, and then sometimes it gets to the point where I'm sitting and talking like now. You may not like what I say, but that doesn't make it not valid. By the way, if you have counterpoints to make and you think you have better counterpoints, then by all means bring them. Hey, thanks. You'll give me a like? Thanks, dude. Or dudette, whatever it is. Sir or ma'am. Yeah, so no Jews, no news. Israel is in the news constantly. You hear about the conflicts happening between Israel and the Muslims for that very reason. And unfortunately, that's the state we're in. So to wrap it up, yeah, Israel continues to be in a state of war. We are ever present for the fact that at any moment, the war can appear very close or immediately in our vicinity on multiple fronts. And Israel appreciates the support from the international community that we do get. And we do have friends and allies around the world. So if you're one of them, thank you for standing with Israel. And I myself, as a person with multiple nationalities, the non-Israeli part of me supports the Israeli part of me because I believe that Israel has every right to not just exist, but flourish and thrive in peace and prosperity, just like any nation should have that right. And I believe that's what Israel wants to do and is very trying and doing its best to do. Unfortunately, we have neighbors who prefer to just FAFO. You're a Christian, so God will do as he pleases. Yes, God will do as he pleases. Whether I believe in God or not is completely irrelevant. I respect anybody's choice to believe in God or not. It's what we do as humans in our actions that determine whether or not we are good or bad, right? It's our actions that determine that. And unfortunately, here in Israel, we have neighbors who have taken on very bad actions historically for the past 100 and many years, since before Israel was even reestablished as a country, right? They've been fighting the presence of Jews here for a long time. And when people say, oh, before Israel, there was peace between the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians in the Holy Land. No, there wasn't. There were a lot of massacres of Jews and of Christians by Muslims during the past several hundred years, when the Muslims, you could argue, had a larger presence than other people. But there were always Jews here since the time of the first and second, kingdom, and even before that. Even when we were expelled by the Greeks and by the Babylonians and by the Romans, there were still Jews here. In fact, just last week, evidence was found, or published, I should say, the evidence was found before, of a place near Tiberias in the Galil, of old Roman evidence on top of Jewish presence, an old synagogue or something. Yeah, it was an old synagogue. And the old Jewish synagogue was here during the time after the Romans kicked them out already. So we can see that by the archaeological evidence that's there. And we can see that despite the often told stories of the fact that, any Jews that did live here during that time were very badly treated, we can actually see from that evidence that in some cases this was not true. At least in some cases this was not true. Some Jews lived quite well during the time after they were expelled by the Romans, right here in Israel. Yeah, that's interesting archaeological article. If you're interested in finding out about that, it was in the news last week. I think they covered it in the Times of Israel. Kind of amazing. They found evidence of Roman archaeological artifacts from the period when Christendom was spreading and flourishing rapidly, on top of Jewish archaeological evidence that demonstrated that the Jews were here, again, after they'd been kicked out already by the Romans. So, fascinating place, amazing country. You scratch the dirt and you've landed on something that's thousands of years old, and then you got to clear out the whole area, because you're going to discover a whole little city underneath where you just were walking. A lot of stories are true. You said that's because all the stories are true. A lot of stories are true. Obviously, some of the stories are not. Right? It depends on the stories. I mean, some of the stories were, even if they may be true, they may have some seeds of truth, or they may be based on truth, but there's always little embellishments or flourishments. Probably, I don't know. I think so, based on the evidence I've seen. But again, I'm not judging that. I'm not pretending to judge that. Who am I to do that? I'm not God. I wouldn't pretend to be God. And if people have the right to believe what they want to believe, right? I'm not going to judge somebody for that. Of course, you read what helped your narrative, huh? No, I don't just read what helps my narrative. I've read all of the religious books of the major religions, and not just the monotheistic Abrahamic ones. Because why wouldn't I? It's interesting to me. I read stories I read, books, whether they fit my narrative or not. Right? I read things I find interesting Am I a Jew? I am Jewish, but like, it doesn't mean anything. And that I don't view my religion in some way where I'm like, well, I'm Jewish, therefore I'm better than you or something. That's not at all how I view the world. Right? I was born Jewish, and I was raised to know my culture and to know my roots. And when I say I'm Jewish, yeah, I'm Jewish because that's how I was born, and I'm also Jewish whether I like it or not. Because when you're Jewish, okay, and I come from a family that suffered at the hands of the Nazis and the Arab nationalists. When you're Jewish, you suffer at the hands of scumbags like that, even if you convert to their religion, even if you denounce Judaism. Plenty of Jews were murdered after they converted to Islam or to even Christianity, because the Christians in charge, or the Muslims in charge at the time, who were the insane ones, not the nice ones that are, I would say most Muslims and most Christians in the world are probably nice people, because people are generally nice. It's the crazy ones you got to watch, right? And plenty of Muslims and plenty of Christians, unfortunately, who were swept up in hateful ideologies like the Nazis or the nowadays Islamo-fascists, unfortunately, they don't view Jews as anything but subhuman. And even if we were to convert to their religion of choice, right, like the Nazis converted to Christianity even 1 or 2 or 3 generations before. Plenty of Jews were Christian since 3 generations already. Their whole family murdered. Why? Because their great-great-grandfather is still Jewish. Yeah, but he's dead since 20 years. Ah, but he died a Jew. Therefore, you're all Jews. That's how the Nazis thought. Same thing with the Muslims. You can convert to Islam, right? And in theory, they won't treat you like a second-class citizen, but in reality, they will. In fact, the whole, what does it say here? What'd you write? I don't against Jewish man. Judaism is a religion like any other, but the Zionism is something I don't like. When you say Zionism is something you don't like, that means you don't like Jews. Because Zionism is the right to self-determination. That's all it is. It's the right for Jews. It's the right, the right of the Jewish people to have self-determination in their ancestral homeland. Do you believe that American Indians should have the ability to have self-determination in their ancestral homeland? Do you believe that French people should have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland? Do you believe that the British should have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland? Do you believe that anybody should have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland? If you don't believe that, then you're not a Zionist. If you do believe that, then you are a Zionist. That's funny. Do you have self-determination, but of not? There are no Palestinian people. They can call themselves that. Sure. Now you can say they call themselves that since about 50 years. Before that, they always called themselves Arabs. They rejected outright the notion of being Palestinians. In fact, all of their leaders would reject it outright and did. They didn't exist as a people. There were no Palestinian people in 1930, in 1940, in 1950, in 1960. It took until literally the 70s for the majority of Arabs who now call themselves Palestinian to actually begin calling themselves Palestinian. There were no Palestinian people, right? And if anything, there were Jewish Palestinians and Christian Palestinians as well as Muslim Palestinians, but they weren't Palestinians and they didn't call themselves that. And when you see the video, the famous video of like Golda Meir saying, you know, I was a Palestinian too. That's Jews making a joke of the fact that nobody took themselves as Palestinians. Yes, they had a passport from the British Mandate. It was a British passport that said British Mandate of Palestine, and they were subjects of the Queen. They were subjects of the King before that. They were subjects of the British Empire. That's why they say that. They weren't Palestinian. They didn't have a Palestinian citizenship. They had a British citizenship issued to them from the British Mandate of Palestine.
like a colony. That's a lie. The Bible state Palestine. You're ridiculous, Faris. Okay, buddy. You think the Bible says Palestine? Quote me the verse, bro. Quote me the verse. There is not a word Palestine in the Bible. Philistines are not the Palestinian people. The name Palestine, Palestina, or Syria, Palestina, and before that, Philistina, from the Greeks. Okay, give you 5 minutes. You bet, buddy. Quote me where it says Palestine and not Philistines, as in David and Goliath. Goliath being the Philistine. They are not the same people, bro. The Philistines are dead and gone. And after they were dead and gone, that's when the Greeks gave that name to the land to insult the Jews. And that's when afterwards the Romans gave the name Syria Palestina to the land to offend the Jews. The very name Palestina, from Syria Palestina, by the Roman Empire, is an insult to Jews after the Romans conquered Judea and Samaria, the land of Israel. It's an insult. Name is an insult. If your entire national identity is literally contrived as an insult against another people, maybe question something. Tell me, by the way, if the Palestinians are so ancient, why can't they say the letter P? Why can't they call themselves Palestinian? Do you know why? They don't say the letter P in Arabic. There is no Palestine. They say Philistine or Palestine. And they don't say Palestine, which is what they often would say if they were to try to say the letter P. They say B. They don't say Palestine. They say Palestine, because they have concocted their own version of the word, which was an insult to the Jews in the first place. Your 5 minutes is almost up, Broham. Faris, give you 5 minutes. Yeah, you can Google it. How many times is the word Palestine mentioned in the Bible? 0. 0, Broham. How many times is the word Israel in the Quran? There, I'll challenge you on that. Go look that up. You'll find that. Yeah, Israel is mentioned in the Quran. The children of Moses, the children of Abraham, the sons of Israel, all that's in the Quran. Do you know why? Because when Muhammad started writing or having his scribes write the Quran, he wanted to sell it to Jews. He wanted Jews to be among the first converts. That's why he went to Medina. He tried to convert the Jews of Medina. When they refused, he got offended. He got his feet hurt. Poor Muhammad. Boo-hoo-hoo. He couldn't handle criticism. Poor Muhammad. So he went and slaughtered all of the Jews of Medina, and the ones that were alive, mainly the women and children, he took as slaves and concubines and sex slaves and forced marriage and applied forced marriage to a number of them. And then he made, from that point on, the rest of the Quran is anti-Semitic vile. Did it never occur to you, if you ever read the Quran, that the first part that he wrote before the Jews of Medina said thanks but no thanks is kind and sweet and gentle towards Jews, and then immediately after that point, everything about it is the Jews are evil, the Jews are this, or a bad thing, and we must kill all the Jews? That never occurred to you? Israel is a state of people, the Messiah. Yeah, Israel is a state, absolutely. Israel is a people. Israel is a state of a people. Israel is a title. It's worth it to speak with. Oh, it's not worth it to speak to me? Okay, Faris, no. You're just a little bitch, and you can't back up your claims with facts because you're a liar or you're an ignorant fool. Either way, you know I'm right, and you can't admit defeat, which is exactly why the war goes on here, because the people who constantly lie and lose, namely the Muslims who fight against Israel and not the Muslims who fight for Israel. By the way, I served with Muslims who fight for Israel, and they are some of the most brave and courageous people on the face of the earth. Yeah, but the ones who live in their boastful culture where they can never admit defeat and they can never admit being wrong, they are the cause for the war going on forever. Them and their useful idiot friends outside of this area. That's a fact. It's because there are people, oh, they need to be understood. They're so misunderstood. The poor Muslims. Oh, the poor Muslims. No, they're not poor Muslims. They choose to fight and live in hell. They choose to FAFO. Well, they didn't release all the hostages. They're still holding bodies of hostages. What 6 scumbags? They're disgusting. They're still doing that. They refuse to release all the hostages because they know that those hostages are their only bargaining chip. And now they're going to find out what it is to mess around with a country that's sick and tired of fighting this war and has every ability to show them what FO means. They're going to find out, and they're already doing it. And they've got it coming to them because of what they've done. What nation would accept the kind of atrocities happening to them that the Palestinians did to Israel on October 7th? And I say Palestinians because it wasn't just Hamas, right? The people that kidnapped the Bebus babies and their mother, they were not in Hamas. They were random Palestinian civilians who just grabbed guns, ran into Gaza, kidnapped babies. They weren't even Hamas. But they all support terrorism. There are very, very, very few Palestinians in Gaza who don't. And I feel sorry for them that do not support terrorism because they're surrounded by an ocean of people who do support it. And the ones who are brave enough to ever say anything against it get beaten and tortured and killed by the terrorists. We know that. And it sucks to be them right now because they're stuck between a rock and a hard place and they can't even escape. They're just stuck there. And they have to hope and pray that they still survive this. But the vast majority in Gaza do support terrorism. And if they don't stop that, and they don't show any signs of stopping it, it may very well lead to their end. Because that's what they're choosing to do. But did they hurt any hostage? Even hostage was satisfied. What are you talking about? Rain? Did they hurt hostages? Yes. Did you not see the hostages who came home looking like freaking Holocaust victims who went in a year and a half before, came out looking, and then they looked perfectly fine and fit when they were taken captive. And then when they were released, they looked like they'd survived starvation for a year. Meanwhile, their hostage takers, their hostage, terrorists that were holding them, the hostage takers, were getting fatter and fatter because Israel is feeding them more than 3,000 calories per day per person in Gaza. But the hostages didn't get 3,000 calories a day in Gaza. They're lucky if they got 300 calories a day in Gaza. Did you not see the ones who came out with fingers amputated or other body parts that were damaged? You're saying that the hostages were satisfied with being hostages? Are you sick in the head? You really, would you like to be held for 500 days not knowing if any moment could be your last moment alive at the hands of some brutal murderer who took you hostage? Or being abused in any number of other ways? Would you like your daughter to be taken captive and abused by violent, disgusting men in ways that are too indescribable to even say? Would you like that? Because that's happened. They've given testimony. Oh, you don't believe them? Why? Because they're Jewish? F off, bro. Read what you said. You said nothing, Faris. You said nothing. What you wrote is complete and utter garbage. You cannot back up the atrocities you're doing. I'm not doing the atrocities. The Israeli army is not doing atrocities. The Israeli army is fighting a war that Hamas started. Oh, I'm a liar, Faris? How am I a liar? You haven't said one thing. You're just making random comments of garbage, like the people you support. You just spray garbage and you hope something sticks. Doesn't stick with me, buddy. Anyway, I got to get going. You all have a wonderful day and a peaceful day, and I hope for peace for all people, including the Arabs who call themselves Palestinian. I would like nothing more than to live side by side in peace and prosperity next to the Palestinian people. The problem is they don't want to live side by side in peace and prosperity with the Jews. They just want to kill us. As long as they want to kill us, well, we got to take care of business. So see you guys later. Yeah, I know you support Palestinians, Faris. I know that's not a surprise. Till next time. Hey, if you hate me, like and subscribe so you can catch more of this stuff and come argue with me next time. If you like this, do the same. See you guys. Peace.